The wind that rolls across northern Poland carries secrets buried in the soil. In the spring of 2022, a construction crew struck concrete where no foundation should have been. A hidden tunnel sealed since the last days of World War II. Beneath the frost and roots lay corridors lined with rusted steel doors, German markings and the faint scent of oil and decay. Inside, fragments of notebooks, test tubes, and warning signs in 3 languages told a story no one had permission to read. What they uncovered would reopen one of the darkest chapters of wartime science and the race to control the future itself. Chapter 1. Before the Storm. Europe on the Edge. The 1930s were a decade of fragile peace, a silence that stretched too long, too thin, across a continent still bleeding from the Great War. Europe looked modern on the surface. New cars, radios and cinemas, yet beneath the glow of electric lights, fear had already begun to take root. Germany was rising again. Factories that once built locomotives now forged steel for tanks. Flags with black crosses and red fields fluttered in schoolyards, while neighbours whispered about rationing and loyalty. Across the continent, governments watched and waited. In London, politicians debated appeasement, convinced that another war could be avoided through reason. In Paris, veterans limped past memorials engraved with too many names, wondering if their sons would fight where they had fallen. And in Berlin, a man with fiery eyes promised to restore dignity to a wounded nation. His speeches filled stadiums, rhythmic, hypnotic, and terrifyingly effective. People cheered, desperate for hope, blind to what that hope demanded. Science, too, became a weapon. Laboratories once dedicated to medicine began to serve ideology. At the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, men in white coats spoke of genetics and purity. Funding flowed from ministries obsessed with control, of people, of progress, of nature itself. Few questioned where it would lead. In the name of discovery, ethical boundaries dissolved. A new kind of war was already being planned, not only with guns and tanks, but with biology, psychology, and code. Ordinary life went on, quietly unaware. Farmers in Bavaria tended to their fields. School children recited lessons about geography. How borders were unfair. How the world owed them space. The newspapers praised strength, unity, destiny. Each headline was a drumbeat, each poster a call to march. In Moscow, Stalin's Soviet Union built walls of secrecy. Files were marked Lichne Delo, personal case, and vanished into archives that would not open for generations. Every scientist was watched, every project classified. Yet even as propaganda divided East and West, both sides were preparing for the same future, one ruled by intelligence, data, and fear. Farther west in the United States, the mood was different, isolated, uncertain, and unwilling to see the fire growing across the Atlantic. Americans tuned their radios to jazz and baseball. The stock market had crashed. The nation was rebuilding itself piece by piece. Few could imagine their sons fighting in Europe again. But in the labs of Princeton and Los Alamos, whispers of theoretical physics hinted at something immense, energy locked within the atom. It was the kind of discovery that could light cities or erase them. As 1938 turned to 1939, Europe's skies darkened. Refugees crossed borders with little more than coats and papers. Poland braced itself between giants, Germany to the west, the Soviet Union to the east. Knowing neutrality meant nothing in the path of ambition. Intelligence agents passed coded messages in cafes, trading rumors of rearmament and secret experiments. One of those experiments was said to be taking place deep in East Prussia. Officially, it was a meteorological observatory. In truth, it was an underground research site, later identified in fragments as Anlage Solstice. Its purpose was unclear, even to those who built it. Some said it was a fuel depot. Others believed it tested early propulsion systems. Only a handful of officers knew the truth, and most of them would not survive the year. War was coming, but no one, not even the generals, understood how different this one would be. It would not just be fought on land or sea. It would be fought in laboratories, in code rooms, in hidden tunnels where science met secrecy. The weapons of tomorrow were being born in the shadows of today. And so, as Europe drifted closer to chaos, the machinery of Operation Solstice began to turn. Somewhere beneath the frozen soil of East Prussia, a new kind of war was quietly taking shape, one the world was never meant to see. Chapter 2. The Descent into Darkness. By the summer of 1939, the world was holding its breath. Diplomats smiled for photographs, but everyone knew peace was breaking apart. Hitler's voice echoed across radio waves, each speech sharper than the last, promises of unity, warnings of betrayal, and a chilling certainty that destiny was on his side. In secret meetings, blueprints for invasion were drawn, tested, perfected. The invasion of Poland was swift, brutal, and precise. Tanks rolled across fields still heavy with morning mist. Villages disappeared in hours. Civilians fled on foot, carrying children, bread, and whatever they could lift. The Wehrmacht's efficiency shocked the world, but behind that precision was something else. A network of scientists, engineers, and intelligence officers gathering data from the battlefield. Every movement, every casualty, every captured weapon was recorded. War, to them, was a laboratory. In Berlin, the ministries hummed with a new energy. The Reich's top scientists received classified directives sealed with the eagle emblem and the words Geheime Reichssache, state secret. Among them were orders related to Project Morgenlicht, a theoretical program exploring radiation effects on fuel efficiency. But the files from that project vanished before the war ended, sealed under another name, Operation Solstice. The directive came from the highest levels of command, to develop technology that could sustain vehicles and weapons systems indefinitely, unaffected by harsh conditions or limited supply. The idea was impossible, yet the Reich had never shied away from impossible ambitions. Deep in East Prussia, a hidden facility began taking shape. Workers from occupied territories were transported under guard. The blueprints called for reinforced bunkers, isolation chambers, and a power grid unlike anything seen before. The construction foreman, a man named Karl Drexler, would later write in his diary, "We were told it was for research, but the equipment looked military. The walls were lined with lead. The engineers spoke Russian and English, as well as German. None of us were allowed near the lower levels." That diary was found decades later, its pages half burned, discovered in the ruins of an abandoned farmhouse 20 kilometers from the Solstice site. Meanwhile, across the continent, the Allies were racing to catch up. British intelligence intercepted fragments of coded transmissions describing experimental energy fields. Analysts dismissed them as propaganda, until reports surfaced of Allied pilots experiencing compass failures near the Baltic coast. The Royal Air Force began referring to the anomaly as the Solstice Zone. Officially, it did not exist. In the Soviet Union, paranoia grew. Stalin's NKVD received its own intelligence, rumors of German scientists testing atomic materials. Soviet agents embedded in occupied Poland reported crates marked with black radiation symbols being moved eastward. One memo, dated December 1944, mentioned a name later found in declassified archives, Anlage 12S, believed to be a secondary testing site connected to the Solstice project. The memo's last line read simply, "Containment uncertain, all witnesses eliminated." Inside the bunker, the air would have smelled of oil and ozone. The hum of machinery never stopped. Witnesses from nearby villages later recalled strange lights flickering through the trees at night, green, cold, silent. It was like the moon fell to earth, one man said in a 1972 interview, his hands trembling as he spoke. And then, it was gone. By early 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. Soviet troops closed in from the east. Orders came to destroy all evidence of advanced research. Laboratories were emptied, documents burned. The staff of Operation Solstice were either evacuated or executed. One final transport, carrying sealed crates and a convoy of scientists, left the site in February 1945. It was never seen again. After the war, Allied intelligence teams scoured Eastern Europe for traces of Nazi scientific programs. They found blueprints, parts, and empty bunkers, but nothing that matched the Solstice descriptions. The Soviets, controlling the region, sealed access to the area entirely. For decades, it appeared as if the operation had never existed. The world moved on, rebuilding cities, redrawing borders, and burying secrets deeper than the ruins themselves. But the truth has a way of resurfacing. In 1963, a Polish geologist, conducting seismic studies near the Missouri lakes, detected unusual magnetic readings beneath the ground. His report was quietly archived, classified under unexplained anomalies. In the 1980s, a Soviet military engineer requested permission to inspect the site. Permission denied, citing heritage preservation. Then, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, the area was sold to private developers. The papers were lost in bureaucratic translation. It would take nearly 80 years before someone finally broke through the surface. A construction crew digging for a water pipeline, their drill striking concrete. And history. The world they uncovered was silent, sealed, untouched. Rusted equipment still stood in place. Symbols of the Reich covered the walls, faded but unmistakable. And on one corroded door, scratched into the metal by hand, a single word. Verboten. Forbidden. What those tunnels contained would ignite a modern investigation, one that would pull historians, scientists, and governments back into a shadow of the past. The ghost of Operation Solstice was no longer buried. It had been waiting. Chapter 3. The Bunker Awakens. The first team descended into the Solstice tunnels in early May of 2022. The air was cold and metallic, as if time itself had stopped breathing. Flashlights cut through dust and fog that hadn't moved in 77 years. Every step echoed, sharp, hollow, lonely. At the entrance, they found reinforced steel doors, each marked with a 4-digit code and the double lightning bolt insignia of the Schutzstaffel. Some had been welded shut from the inside. Others stood ajar, hinges warped by age. The smell was heavy. Oil, rust, and something faintly chemical. A silence so absolute that even whispers felt too loud. Leading the team was Dr. Marta Lewandowska, an archaeologist specializing in wartime industrial sites. She'd spent decades studying German engineering from the war, but nothing prepared her for this. It felt deliberate, she later said. Not abandoned, entombed. The walls were lined with cables that led deeper underground. Old warning signs in German read, Strahlung, kein Zutritt, radiation, no entry. In the first chamber, the team discovered workbenches overturned, papers scattered across the floor, and glass jars labeled with handwritten codes. Most were shattered. Inside one intact jar was a pale residue that crumbled on contact with air, its composition still under analysis today. As they advanced, the atmosphere thickened. Carbon dioxide levels spiked, their breathing masks fogged. They entered a second chamber where the floor was covered in ash and scorched fragments of documents. Among the debris was a single rusted plaque reading Anlage Solstice, Gruppe A. Next to it, an incomplete chart showed dates from 1944 and a handwritten line, Versuch 17, erfolgreich, Experiment 17 successful. A generator sat against the far wall, wrapped in tarps and cables. Its design was alien, decades ahead of 1940s technology. The control panel bore English writing, not German, with measurements in inches, not centimeters. How it came to be there remains unanswered. News of the find spread quickly through academic circles, though officials tried to contain it. Within weeks, a joint Polish-German-UN scientific commission was formed to examine the site. Military historians identified it as one of several rumoured research facilities tied to the Ahnenerbe, the SS's research division obsessed with pseudoscience and advanced physics. But this bunker was different. It showed evidence of collaboration between German, Soviet, and possibly Western scientists. Something no document from that era officially acknowledged. The deeper levels told the darker story. In Chamber 4, they found a sealed glass observation room with restraints bolted to the floor. Inside, skeletal remains still rested against the wall. Nearby, a rusted clipboard listed initials, dates, and 2 columns labeled dose and time. One entry read, KL 61244, 70 cm, 4.16 watts radiation dosage. Dr. Lewandowska paused her team for a moment of silence before ordering the chamber closed again. Whatever they were testing, she said later, it wasn't machines. It was people. But the most shocking discovery came from Chamber 6, the command room. On one of the control consoles lay a sealed metal cylinder engraved with the number 3127. Inside, perfectly preserved, were microfilm reels. Once digitized, the film revealed schematics for what appeared to be a propulsion system, powered not by combustion, but by particle radiation harnessed through magnetic fields. It was, in essence, an early form of nuclear drive. The Soviets had sought such technology in the 1950s. The Americans perfected it decades later, yet here it was, designed in 1944, buried in a forgotten bunker. Days turned to weeks. Every discovery raised more questions. Were these experiments independent Nazi ambitions, or part of a larger secret network between wartime powers? Who built the hybrid machinery? And why had the Soviets gone to such lengths to bury it under heritage protection? Then came the final revelation. In Chamber 7, the lowest and most heavily sealed level, they uncovered a cylindrical vault, locked by a mechanical wheel fused with rust. After 2 days of careful cutting, it opened. Inside were 6 small canisters, each labeled Sol D. 4 were empty, 2 remained sealed. The radiation meters spiked the instant the lid lifted. The team evacuated. Subsequent analysis under controlled lab conditions confirmed trace isotopes unknown to recorded wartime production. The composition matched neither uranium nor plutonium. It was an experimental compound theorized in post-war Soviet research under the codename Kovalenko material. Somehow, it had existed a decade earlier. As word leaked, governments reacted swiftly. Access to the site was restricted under NATO jurisdiction. Public statements dismissed the Solstice discovery as historical, infrastructure with misidentified materials. Yet, satellite images soon showed military transports leaving the area at night. Dr. Lewandowska refused to stay silent. In an interview before the blackout order, she said quietly, "History doesn't disappear. It just waits until we're brave enough to dig it up." The operation was sealed once more. Concrete poured, security fences erected, but the story had already escaped. Within academic circles, whispers began that Operation Solstice was never about energy. It was about endurance, about pushing human survival and human cruelty beyond its limit. What those underground chambers revealed was not just the remnant of Nazi ambition, but the beginning of a scientific race that never truly ended. The Cold War's earliest shadow was born here, under the soil, in silence, where light was forbidden. And though the bunker sleeps again, the questions it raised still echo. What did they build? What did they test? And how much of that knowledge survived the war? Hidden, waiting, beneath new flags and new laboratories. As the final team packed their gear and sealed the entrance, one engineer turned to the corridor and whispered, "We shouldn't have opened it." The camera footage ends there. The light fades. The wind outside carries the dust of history and the faint, unshakable sense that something down there still hums in the dark. Chapter 4. Aftermath and Silence. When the Solstice site was sealed again, it didn't end the story. It only buried it deeper, under layers of bureaucracy and quiet fear. The official line was simple: a relic, a bunker, nothing of consequence. But in the months that followed, quiet movements began among those who had been there. The scientists, the soldiers, the archivists, each haunted in their own way by what they had seen. Dr. Marta Lewandowska stopped giving interviews. She returned to Warsaw, lectured twice, then resigned. Her colleagues said she grew withdrawn, obsessed with cataloguing every surviving document before they vanished into government custody. One colleague described her final lecture as less history, more confession. She told the audience, "When you study the past long enough, you begin to see the present inside it." After that, she disappeared from public life. Among the excavation crew, several members reported illness, unexplained nausea, fatigue, headaches. Radiation exposure tests came back inconclusive. One technician later admitted that his dosimeter malfunctioned during the dig. He kept the device, still cracked and silent, in a box in his home. "I just wanted proof that it really happened," he said. Meanwhile, journalists tried to trace the story, but every lead hit a wall. Documents that once existed no longer did. Government spokespeople denied the project's classification. When asked for comment, one Polish official simply said, "Some history isn't meant to be reopened." But the traces were everywhere if you knew where to look. Satellite images revealed new fencing patterns around the site. Local residents spoke of unmarked trucks arriving at night. The nearby forest became off-limits for ecological study. And in 2023, a Freedom of Information request regarding Operation Solstice returned a curious response. No records found. Not denied, not classified, just gone. The few surviving files that leaked to independent historians painted a grim picture. Solstice had been more than a single experiment. It was part of a broader wartime network. Endurance trials, one memo called them. Subject exposure protocols, said another. They spoke of testing the limits of human tolerance to radiation, oxygen deprivation, and psychological stress. Some subjects were prisoners, others volunteers seeking redemption in service of science. The post-war Soviets had likely discovered the site first, buried it, and erased the records. Perhaps they took the research, repurposed it. Perhaps they feared it too much to continue. Either way, the truth died in silence. In nearby villages, people began remembering things they'd long forgotten. An old woman, born during the war, told investigators about her father, a labourer taken to work at a factory underground. He never returned. Another man recalled hearing a distant explosion one night in 1945. The sky lit up green, he said, and for days, no birds sang. Even today, the trees above the Solstice site grow in uneven rings, twisted and pale at their roots. Soil samples show traces of metals not native to the region. Scientists call it environmental contamination. The locals call it cursed ground. For the survivors of history, the emotional toll was heavier than the physical. Historians who examined the recovered files often spoke of a feeling they couldn't shake, a sense of trespass. It wasn't just a laboratory, said one researcher. It was a place where the human conscience was dismantled piece by piece. As the investigation faded from headlines, new projects took its place: renewable energy, artificial intelligence, climate adaptation. Yet beneath the excitement of progress, the echoes of Solstice persisted, a reminder that humanity's brightest pursuits often begin in the shadows. In 2024, a small memorial appeared near the forest. No government logo, no names, just a plaque in 3 languages. It read, "For those who were lost in pursuit of knowledge, and for those who dared to uncover it." Visitors still come quietly, leaving candles, small stones, and folded papers. Some are families of missing wartime workers. Others are students of history, drawn to the mystery. Every few months, someone reports hearing a low hum beneath the ground, like distant machinery still turning. Dr. Lewandowska once said that history is not about the past, but about what we choose to remember. And as silence reclaimed the forest, it became clear that remembering comes at a cost. In the end, Operation Solstice was never officially acknowledged. Its findings remain locked away in vaults scattered across Europe and beyond. But the questions it raised is about ethics, ambition, and what it means to pursue discovery at any cost, still linger like smoke. And sometimes, when the wind passes through the ruins, it carries with it the faint sound of metal doors and whispers of the men and women who stood there, believing they were building the future. Perhaps in a way they were, just not the one they imagined. Chapter 5. Shadows that never fade. Time has a way of smoothing over the rough edges of history. Monuments rise, textbooks simplify, and the raw pain of the past becomes a line in a timeline. Yet some stories resist erasure. Operation Solstice is one of them, a scar beneath Europe's soil that refuses to heal. By 2025, much of what had been uncovered was once again hidden behind security fences and official silence. The public knew fragments: a bunker from the war, possible radiation hazards, ongoing analysis. But for those who had followed the investigation from the start, it was clear the discovery had stirred something far larger than an archaeological mystery. It had reopened a question that nations still struggle to answer. How much truth can a government afford to reveal? Behind closed doors, new research quietly resumed. Military historians in Germany, Poland, and the UK began comparing the Solstice schematics to declassified Cold War propulsion experiments. Patterns emerged: shapes, diagrams, chemical signatures. Too similar to be coincidence. One British physicist, speaking under condition of anonymity, said, "If Solstice existed, then our Cold War began before the first shot of it was ever fired." That realization carries weight. It suggests that even before the bombs fell on Berlin, the seeds of the post-war arms race were already germinating underground, in labs where science was no longer about discovery, but dominance. In a small office in Warsaw, an archivist named Tomasz Bielinski continued to dig, one file at a time. He had no clearance, no authority, just curiosity and patience. He spent months reconstructing destroyed logs from Allied intelligence microfilm. In one frame, barely legible, he found a signature. An American Army liaison officer stationed in 1945 near Königsberg. The officer's report mentioned, captured experimental drives of hybrid origin. It was dated April 12, 1945. The same week the Solstice bunker was sealed. That single document linked two worlds, the dying Reich and the dawning superpowers. It implied that what was buried in East Prussia was not forgotten, but inherited. The implications ripple outward. The idea that the Cold War's technological rivalry, nuclear propulsion, radiation endurance, early AI computation, might trace its origin back to a Nazi experiment changes how we understand the 20th century. It blurs the moral lines that nations like to draw between victor and vanquished. Progress, it seems, is rarely pure. Still, for most, the story ends where the forest begins. The bunker is now under military jurisdiction. The memorial plaque remains untouched. The villagers nearby have learned not to ask questions when helicopters pass overhead at night. Every so often, independent researchers return. They collect soil, measure radiation, listen to the earth. A few claim to have detected rhythmic vibrations underground, faint but consistent, like the pulse of a dormant machine. Authorities dismiss it as seismic noise. Perhaps it is. Or perhaps, as some quietly suggest, the experiment never truly ended. For the men and women who risked everything to uncover Solstice, the emotional toll lingers. Dr. Lewandowska's notes, now archived at the University of Gdansk, end with a single page, handwritten, uneven, almost unreadable. We opened a door meant to stay closed, not because of what was inside, but because of what it says about us. Those words capture the real lesson of Solstice, that the pursuit of knowledge, once divorced from humanity, becomes indistinguishable from madness. The scientists of 1944 believed they were saving their nation. The researchers of 2022 believed they were saving history. Both sought truth. Both paid for it. As the decades pass, the Solstice site may fade again into moss and soil, its concrete crumbling back into the earth. But history has a pulse, faint, persistent, unwilling to die. Somewhere beneath those northern woods, among the tunnels and the rust, the echo of the past endures. The cameras are gone now. The lights, the equipment, the teams, all vanished. What remains is silence and memory, a reminder that the past never really stays buried. It waits, it listens, and sometimes when the ground trembles just enough, it remembers. Because the story of Operation Solstice isn't just about what we found underground. It's about what we still carry within us, the ambition, the fear, the quiet hunger to know. And as long as those instincts live in us, the shadows of history will never fully fade.